My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter. I'm 38 years old, and the strange thing about the moment your life quietly ends is that it doesn't feel like an ending when it begins. There's no sound, no warning, no voice in your head telling you, this is the decision, this is the moment, this is the crack that will split everything open. Sometimes, it starts with something as small as feeling invisible in your own life. I used to think I understood pressure. 14-hour surgical shifts, lives balanced on the edge of my hands, the kind of responsibility that trains you to compartmentalize, to stay calm when everything inside you wants to break. I was good at that. Too good, maybe. Because while I was holding everything together in the operating room, my life outside of it was quietly falling apart, and I didn't see it. My husband's name is Daniel Carter. We had been together for 9 years, married for 6. We met in grad school. I was finishing my surgical residency. He was getting his MBA. Daniel was the kind of man people noticed the second he walked into a room. Confident, charismatic, effortlessly social. I was the opposite. Quiet, focused, the kind of woman people underestimate because she doesn't perform. For a long time, we worked. Not the loud kind of happiness people post online. Something steadier. Late nights folding laundry together. Passing our daughter back and forth during sleepless nights without needing to speak. Leaving each other notes because sometimes writing felt easier than saying things out loud. At least for me. Our daughter Nina was 5. Our son Caleb was 3. They were everything. The only part of my life that felt untouched. Safe. Or at least, I thought they were. The house we lived in was the first place I ever felt like I had built something real. 4 bedrooms. Quiet neighborhood. I had paid most of the down payment with savings from before the marriage. I remember the first night we moved in. Standing in the doorway, thinking, this is mine. This is ours. This is where my children will grow up. I didn't know I was standing in a place that would eventually feel like a crime scene. My younger sister, Vanessa, moved back into the city about a year before everything broke. That should have been my first warning. Not the move itself, the pattern. Vanessa had never stayed anywhere for long. Jobs, relationships, cities. She moved through them like they were temporary. But she had something else. Charm. The kind that made people want to believe her. The kind that made you think, this time will be different. I had helped her before, loaned her money, let her stay with us briefly, invited her to dinners. Because that's what sisters do. At least, that's what I believed. I didn't notice it at first, and I need to be honest about that. This isn't one of those stories where I saw everything coming and ignored it. I missed it. I missed the way Daniel started texting Vanessa separately. I missed the shift in their conversations, how they developed their own rhythm. Something just slightly out of sync with the rest of us. I missed the way Daniel started pulling away from me, inch by inch. It was subtle. So subtle I explained it away. He stopped asking about my day. He started going to bed later, or earlier, or not at all. Headaches became excuses. Distance became routine. On Saturday mornings, he'd hand me the kids and disappear into the bedroom with his phone. I noticed the distance, but I told myself what people always tell themselves. This is normal. This is what happens when life gets busy. 2 kids, a demanding career, a long marriage. I thought we were in a rough patch. I thought time would fix it. I thought wrong. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Vanessa showing up when I wasn't home. Daniel's mood lifting on days she visited and flattening when she didn't. Arguments that came out of nowhere. Small, pointless fights that felt constructed. Like he was building a case. Nina started asking questions. Mom, is Dad mad at you? Why doesn't he read to me anymore? I told her he was just tired. I covered for him. I protected him, without even knowing what I was protecting him from. Caleb became clingy. He followed Daniel around the house, arms raised. Daddy up! Daddy up! And Daniel would pick him up with one arm, scrolling his phone with the other. I saw it once from the hallway, and something cold moved through my chest. Not suspicion. Not yet. Just something I didn't have a name for. The night everything broke was a Tuesday in October. A family gathering. Too much wine. Too much noise. Too many people who had known me my entire life. I was standing near the table, half listening to a conversation, when my cousin's wife, Sandra, walked up to me and said something that will live in my head for the rest of my life. Casually, like it was old news. I'm glad you and Daniel worked things out after the whole Vanessa situation. That must have been so hard. The room didn't spin. That's what people say. It didn't. It went still. Completely, horribly still. Like the moment in surgery when something goes wrong and you have 3 seconds to fix it before everything collapses. I felt the blood leave my face. Sandra saw it. Her expression changed. Oh my God, Evelyn, I thought you knew. I don't remember what I said. I think I said, "Excuse me." I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, put both hands on the sink, and looked at myself. And I thought very clearly, my husband slept with my sister. And then, my children were in that house. I drove us home. Daniel sat in the passenger seat. The kids slept in the back. The silence was unbearable. I carried Nina inside first, then Caleb, tucked them in, kissed their foreheads. Nina stirred. "Mama, love you." "I love you too, baby." I stood in the hallway for 10 seconds, breathing. Before I walked into the kitchen, Daniel was already there, waiting. "Is it true?" 2 words, flat, heavy, final. He didn't hesitate. "Yes." And the world didn't end. That's the strangest part. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Everything looked exactly the same. Except now, I knew my life had been a lie. I went upstairs, packed a bag. Clothes, laptop, essentials. I didn't take anything else. Because none of it felt like mine anymore. Not the house. Not the bed. Especially not the bed. I took off my wedding ring and placed it gently on the kitchen counter, like something that used to matter. "I'll come back for the kids tomorrow." My voice didn't shake. "Don't be here when I do." He tried to speak, said words like mistake. "We can fix this. Please." But I couldn't hear him. Not really. Because it wasn't just betrayal. It was who? My sister. The one person whose betrayal I couldn't file away, couldn't rationalize. I looked at him one last time and felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just done. I drove to a hotel, sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and for the first time in years, I cried quietly, endlessly, until there was nothing left. Then I stopped, washed my face, opened my laptop, and called Nathan. "Nathan, I need your help." There was a pause. Then, "Daniel and Vanessa?" He already knew. "I'll clear my morning," he said. "Don't text them, don't sign anything, get some sleep, call me at 8. That was the moment everything shifted. Because what Daniel didn't understand, what Vanessa didn't understand, was that the quiet woman they had mistaken for passive was about to dismantle everything. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, but with the same precision I use in an operating room. Because when something is beyond saving, you don't try to fix it. You remove it, and you protect what's left. And the only things left were my children. Nathan moved fast. That was one of the first things that steadied me in those first 72 hours after I left. Watching someone else respond to catastrophe the way I did. No panic, no wasted motion, no sentimental pauses, pretending a severed thing might still be stitched back together if you just held it together long enough. By Monday morning, I was sitting in his office in scrubs I had worn through a 14-hour shift and never changed out of. My hair pulled back too tightly, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. Nathan slid a legal pad across the desk. "Start at the beginning," he said. So I did. I told him about Sandra at the party, about the bathroom mirror, about Daniel saying yes without hesitation, about Vanessa, about the children sleeping 20 feet down the hall while my husband and my younger sister took a match to my marriage in the one place my children were supposed to be safe. Nathan didn't interrupt. He just wrote. Every now and then, he'd ask a short question. "Dates? How long was Vanessa back in town? Any texts, emails, witnesses?" He asked the way surgeons ask in trauma cases, not because they're cold, because details matter when you're trying to stop something from bleeding. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a long moment. "The facts are catastrophic for him," he said quietly, "and worse for her. Her. Vanessa." It should have shocked me that hearing that didn't make me feel better. It didn't. Nothing felt better. I was just operating now. Running on training. Precision. Triage. Within 72 hours, Nathan had filed for legal separation, moved for temporary primary custody, and started documenting everything. A mutual friend of Daniel's, someone with enough guilt left in him to do one decent thing, forwarded screenshots that confirmed what I already knew. Months. That was how long it had been going on. Months of texts, months of lies, months of my sister showing up to dinners, kissing my children on their heads, sitting at my table while my husband looked me in the eye and asked me how my day had been. One message stayed with me longer than the others. Not because it was the worst, because it was ordinary. "Can't stay long. Evelyn might get home early." That was the line. No poetry, no passion, no grand declaration. Just logistics. The kind of practical cruelty that only happens when betrayal has become routine. Nathan asked if I wanted him to print the screenshots. I said yes. Then I sat there and read through enough of them to understand something that changed the shape of my grief. It wasn't an accident. Not one night. not a lapse, not some sudden reckless collapse under pressure. It was a system, a pattern, a private little world they had built inside my life while I was busy paying for the roof over all our heads. And somehow that hurt more, because it meant they had time to stop, time to think, time to look at the children, at me, at each other, and keep going anyway. Nathan eventually took the pages from my hands. "That's enough for now," he said. I nodded. But later in the parking garage, I sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel and thought, how many times did he kiss me after being with her? How many times did Vanessa hug me in my own kitchen with that secret sitting warm in her chest? That was the problem with betrayal. It never ends where it happened. It spreads backward, infects old memories, rewrites ordinary moments into evidence. I moved into a temporary rental that week. 2 bedrooms, neutral walls, furnished just enough to feel temporary, not enough to feel like home. Nina noticed immediately. Children always do. She stood in the doorway of what would become her room, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd slept with since she was 2, and asked, "Are we staying here?" "For a little while," I told her. She looked past me, like maybe Daniel would appear with Caleb's overnight bag and some explanation that made sense. He didn't. Caleb was too young to understand logistics. He only understood absence. He wandered through the rental the first night calling, "Daddy," in that soft, confused voice toddlers use when they still believe missing things will answer if they ask nicely enough. I had delivered bad news to families in hospital consultation rooms. I had looked strangers in the eye and explained loss in language gentle enough to be survivable. None of that prepared me for my son standing in the middle of a rented living room asking for his father. I knelt in front of him. "Daddy's not here tonight, baby." He frowned. "Work?" I almost said yes. It would have been easier. But I had already spent too much of my marriage protecting the reputations of people who did not deserve protection. So I said the only thing I could manage. "Daddy's somewhere else right now." He climbed into my lap and pressed his face against my shoulder like that solved it. And maybe for him, at 3, for that moment, it did. The court hearing for temporary custody happened faster than I expected. That's the thing about crisis. When you're inside it, time becomes unnatural. Days stretch. Hours collapse. A week can feel like a year. A year can fit inside one sentence. Nathan prepared me carefully. "No improvising," he said. "No emotional speeches. Answer what's asked. Let the facts do the work." I almost laughed, as if I were the type to make emotional speeches in court. Still, I understood what he meant. The world loves a woman until she becomes angry in public. Then suddenly her pain becomes instability. So I gave them composure. I gave them dates, routines, childcare responsibilities, school emails, pediatric appointments, work schedules, timelines. I gave them what I had done and what Daniel had not. I gave them facts. The affair had taken place in the family home. The children had been present. Daniel had been progressively disengaging from parenting for months before discovery. Vanessa's involvement complicated the home environment further in a way the court did not appreciate. And in the days after I left, Daniel had not stabilized. That mattered. According to mutual friends, and later according to evidence Nathan obtained, Daniel had been spiraling, not eating, not sleeping, calling Vanessa obsessively, showing up at her apartment, sending long strings of texts swinging wildly between rage, pleading, self-pity, and panic. That wasn't speculation. That was documented. That was the father of my children. And no matter how badly part of me wanted someone to tell me I was being too harsh, the larger, steadier part of me knew the truth. A child does not care whether instability comes from cruelty or collapse. Unstable is unstable. The judge agreed. Temporary primary physical custody was awarded to me. Daniel was granted supervised visitation twice a week. When the ruling came down, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I watched Daniel's face as he realized what he had lost access to, and I felt something worse than victory. I felt grief sharpen into permanence. Because whatever he had done to me, he was still Nina and Caleb's father. And now our children's lives would be measured in schedules and facilities and monitored visits and careful language and all the bureaucratic architecture people build around broken families after the damage is done. Daniel turned toward me in the hallway after the hearing. His face looked thinner, older, like guilt had finally started eating him from the inside. "Evelyn, please," he said. "You know I love them." I kept walking. He followed. "I made a mistake. I know what I did. I know it's unforgivable, but supervised visitation? You know I'm not dangerous." That word caught on something inside me. Dangerous. He wanted the court to think danger had to look like violence, like shouting, bruises, broken furniture. But there are quieter forms of danger. A father who detonates the home his children trust. A man who confuses selfishness with entitlement. A parent who is so consumed by his own emotional wreckage that he stops being able to see what his children need. I stopped and turned to him. My voice was calm enough to scare even me. You brought my sister into our home while our children slept down the hall. His eyes filled. I kept going. You don't get to lecture me about what counts as dangerous. He opened his mouth again, maybe to apologize, maybe to ask for mercy. I walked away before he could choose. Nina asked me that night, in the rental kitchen, while I was pretending to know where I had packed the cereal bowls, when is Dad coming home? Children ask questions in the middle of ordinary tasks. That's one of the cruelest things about them. They place grief in the middle of groceries, toothbrushing, pajamas, breakfast. I set the bowl down slowly. Dad's not coming home here, sweetheart. She studied my face, not crying, not panicking, just trying to understand the geometry of a sentence that shouldn't exist. Did he do something bad? I should tell you that Nina has Daniel's mouth and my eyes. It made moments like that unbearable, because she looked like both the wound and the witness. I crouched in front of her. Dad made some choices that hurt our family. Her brow tightened. Did he hurt you? That question split me open in a place I had not prepared for. Not because she asked it, because she was 5 and already trying to define hurt. Already learning that love and pain could occupy the same room. I reached up and tucked her hair behind her ear. He didn't hurt me in a way you need to be scared of, I said carefully. But yes, he hurt me. She nodded like she understood, though she didn't. Not fully. Then she asked the question I would hear in my sleep for years. Is he going to hurt us too? No courtroom prepared me for that. No degree, no training, no practice composure. Just my daughter standing in a rented kitchen under fluorescent light, trying to map adult betrayal onto a child's understanding of safety. I pulled her into my arms so fast she squeaked. No, I said, and for the first time in weeks my voice broke. No, baby, I won't let anybody hurt you. She wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, okay. Like that settled it. Like mothers are still gods at 5 years old. I held her until the timer on the oven started beeping and Caleb wandered in, dragging his blanket behind him. Later that night, after they were asleep, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried with a towel over my mouth so they wouldn't hear me. Not because I missed Daniel. That part had already calcified into something colder. I cried because my children had been forced into a story they had done nothing to deserve. Because innocence, once cracked, never fits back together the same way. The supervised visitation center smelled like disinfectant and crayons. I hated it on site. Bright plastic chairs, murals on the walls, trying too hard to soften the fact that this was a place built for damage control. Daniel saw the kids there for the first time 6 days after the order. Nina hesitated when she saw him. Just for a second. That was all. A tiny pause. But if you're a parent, you know that pause can contain an entire collapse. He knelt with his arms open. Nina Bear, he said softly. She went to him eventually. Caleb ran immediately, because 3-year-olds don't know how to hold grudges when all they want is familiarity. I stood back and watched through the glass for the first few minutes before I forced myself to leave the viewing area. That was harder than I expected. Because part of me wanted to keep staring, to catalog every expression on Daniel's face, to see whether guilt had finally made him human again. Another part of me couldn't stand to watch him touch the children with the same hands that had helped tear their home apart. The visit supervisor, an older woman with tired, kind eyes, said, "You can wait in the lobby." I nodded. I sat in the lobby and looked at the floor for 43 minutes. At one point, I heard Caleb laugh from the other room, bright and delighted. And that sound nearly ruined me, because children are built for reunion, even temporary ones. And adults mistake that resilience for lack of injury. It isn't. It's trust stretching itself thin, hoping not to snap. When the visit ended, Nina came out quieter than she'd gone in. She put her hand in mine and didn't say anything until we were halfway to the car. Then, staring straight ahead, she asked, "Why was there a lady watching us?" I swallowed. "Because right now, that's part of the rules." She nodded once. Did Dad break the rules? There it was again. Her trying to build a moral universe from pieces too jagged for a child to hold. I buckled Caleb into his seat first to buy myself a second. Then I leaned against the open car door and looked at her. "Dad broke important promises," I said. She was silent for a moment. Then she asked, "With Aunt Vanessa?" I went cold. I hadn't said Vanessa's name around her. Daniel must have. Or maybe children hear more than adults ever realize. Either way, there it was. My private horror, now living in the vocabulary of my daughter. "Yes," I said. Nina got into the car on her own after that. No tears, no tantrum. Just a small, terrible kind of understanding settling into her shoulders. That was the moment something in me hardened permanently against Daniel. Not the affair itself, not even the lie. The fact that our daughter now had to carry names and choices and fractures that should never have belonged to her. In the second week, Daniel sent me an email. Not because he respected boundaries, because Nathan had made it clear that all communication would now go through documented channels unless it concerned the children directly. The subject line was, "Please read." I read it once, then forwarded it to Nathan. It was everything I expected and somehow worse. Apologies, excuses, references to loneliness, to how seen Vanessa had made him feel, to how he had convinced himself the marriage was already dying. There was one line I had to read 3 times because of how casually monstrous it was. "You were always so strong, Evelyn. I think part of me stopped believing you needed me." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes contempt sounds a lot like laughter when it first leaves the body. He had betrayed me, dismantled our family, endangered our children's sense of safety, and somewhere inside himself he had still managed to cast himself as a man neglected by strength. As if competency were abandonment. As if my ability to survive pressure had invited his disloyalty. Nathan called 20 minutes later. "I assume you read it?" "Yes." And if I answer, I'll say something accurate and inadvisable." He was quiet for a second. Then, very gently, "Don't answer." So I didn't. That was the beginning of a new kind of discipline. Not the discipline of surgery. Not the discipline of motherhood. The discipline of refusing to bleed in front of people who mistook your pain for an opening. By the 3rd week, the shape of my new life had started to form. School drop-offs. Hospital shifts rearranged around custody. Pediatric appointments. Tiny socks. Lunch boxes. Video calls scheduled through lawyers and court orders and people with clipboards. I became, in practical terms, a single mother faster than I became anything else. And maybe that was a mercy, because logistics leave less room for collapse. But collapse finds room anyway. Usually at night. Usually around 2 a.m. Usually when the apartment was silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. And I would remember Daniel, standing in our kitchen, saying yes, and realize all over again that he had not even tried to lie. There are kinds of honesty that feel more violent than deception. That was one of them. If the affair had been the first betrayal, what came next would teach me something worse. That there are wounds your enemies inflict, and then there are wounds your own family agrees you should endure quietly. I told my parents what Daniel had done, expecting devastation. I expected grief, fury, loyalty. I expected my mother to cry. I expected my father to say words like unforgivable and disgrace, and how dare he. Instead, my mother called Daniel before she called me. And that was when I learned that the wreckage of my marriage was only the beginning. My mother didn't call me first. That detail matters more than anything she said afterward. Because when something catastrophic happens in your life, the order of who reaches for you and who doesn't tells you exactly where you stand. She called Daniel, the man who had slept with my younger sister. The man who had turned our home into something I could no longer step into without feeling contaminated by memory. She called him before she called me. I found out later during mediation, in a room that smelled faintly of coffee and stale air, where truth had a way of slipping out between legal strategies and exhausted silences. Daniel said it like it was normal. "Your mom called me the next morning. She said we needed to keep things quiet, that families survive these things when people don't make a spectacle." I remember sitting there, hands folded neatly on the table, hearing that sentence and feeling something inside me shift. Not break. Breaking is loud. This was quieter, more final. When my mother finally called me, her voice was soft, careful, like she was talking to someone fragile. "Evelyn," she said, "I heard there's tension." Tension. I almost admired the restraint of that word. Tension, I repeated. "Well," she continued quickly, "Daniel told me things have been difficult. Marriage is complicated. You know that better than anyone." I let her talk, because I wanted to hear how far she would go before she reached the truth. She never did. Instead, she said something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Whatever is happening, sweetheart, we should handle it privately. There's no reason to drag Vanessa into anything formal. She's young. People make mistakes." People make mistakes. That's what she called it. Not betrayal. Not destruction. Not the deliberate, repeated violation of trust inside a home where 2 children slept down the hall. A mistake. And not just any mistake. A mistake that deserved protection. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. "Mom," I said very calmly, "Daniel slept with Vanessa." Silence. For a full 3 seconds. Then, "Yes, I understand that's what you're saying, but..." But marriages go through things. And Vanessa, she's always been impulsive. You know that. We don't need to ruin her life over this. There it was. The calculation. Not who was hurt, not what was broken, but whose life was more valuable to preserve. My father called later that evening. He didn't bother with softness. "You're overreacting," he said. I was standing in this kitchen of the rental, holding Caleb's sippy cup, watching milk drip slowly onto the counter because I hadn't screwed the lid on properly. "Am I?" I asked. "Yes, these things happen. Affairs happen. You don't blow up the entire family over it." I stared at the milk spreading across the surface. "You think this is about an affair?" "I think it's about you being dramatic," he said flatly. "Dragging this into court, trying to take the kids, humiliating Daniel. What does that accomplish?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes the only response left is disbelief. "Daniel slept with my sister," I said, "in my house, while my children were there." "And you think destroying everything is going to fix that?" he snapped. Destroying everything. That's what he thought I was doing. Not protecting my children. Not responding to betrayal. Destroying. Something inside me went very, very quiet. "Let me ask you something," I said. "What? If Vanessa had done this to you, if she had betrayed your marriage like this, would you be telling her husband to keep it quiet?" He hesitated, just for a second. Then, "That's not the same." Of course it wasn't, because I was the one expected to absorb it. I ended the call without raising my voice, without arguing, without explaining, because there was nothing left to explain. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. Loyalty in my family had never been unconditional. It had always been directional. And I had just discovered I was no longer on the receiving end of it. Wow. Nathan listened to all of this 2 days later, sitting across from me with that same still focus he brought to everything. When I finished, he didn't offer comfort. He offered clarity. "They've chosen their position," he said. I nodded. "Yes." "Good," he replied. "Good." That word should have offended me. It didn't, because I understood what he meant. Clarity is useful, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Ma'am. That was when we stopped reacting and started planning. The house came first. Nathan built the argument carefully. 85% of the down payment had come from my premarital savings. The affair had been conducted inside the marital home. In our state, that mattered. Adultery wasn't just emotional, it had financial consequences. Daniel's lawyer tried to push back, tried to argue shared ownership, marital contribution, emotional distress. Nathan dismantled it piece by piece, calmly, precisely, like removing something diseased. The judge ruled in my favor. I kept the house. Daniel received a small equity payout, enough to start over, not enough to pretend nothing had happened. I didn't celebrate. I signed the paperwork and walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon light that felt too normal for what had just been decided. Because a house isn't just walls. It's memory. And now every room in that house carried something I couldn't unsee. The inheritance. That was where everything changed. My parents had spent years talking about it. At holidays. At dinners. In passing comments that felt like promises. Properties. Investments. A vacation home on the coast. "It'll all be split evenly," my mother used to say, "between you and Vanessa. That's the legacy." I had never cared. Not really. I had my own career, my own money, my own life. But after the calls, after the way they had minimized what happened, after they had asked me to protect the person who helped destroy my family, I started thinking about it differently. Nathan did too. He leaned back in his chair one afternoon and said, "We can solve multiple problems at once." I looked at him. "How?" "You remove yourself," he said simply. I frowned. "From what?" "The trust, the inheritance, everything." I stared at him. "That doesn't solve anything. That just gives Vanessa more." He shook his head slightly. "Not if we redirect it." That conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, the plan was clear. Elegant. Irreversible. I called my parents. Not angry. Not emotional. Just calm. "I've been thinking about everything," I told them. "About the situation. About what you said." My mother sounded relieved immediately. "I'm so glad, Evelyn. I knew you'd come around." "I'm going to remove myself from the family trust." Silence. Then confusion. "What do you mean?" "I don't want any part of it," I said. "I'd like my share redirected into a trust for Nina and Caleb. Education, future expenses. I'll manage it." Another pause. Then my father spoke. "That's actually very generous." Generous. That word again. They thought I was being noble. Selfless. My mother's voice softened. "This is why you've always been the responsible one," she said. "The good one." I closed my eyes for a second. "Will you agree to it?" I asked. "Yes," my father said. "Of course." "Good," I replied. And just like that, it was done. The paperwork took weeks. Legal structures, irrevocable terms, financial protections layered carefully. By the time it was finalized, my portion of the inheritance was no longer part of anything Vanessa could touch. No longer part of anything Daniel could ever benefit from. It belonged entirely to my children. Permanently. Pesito. Vanessa didn't understand at first. Of course she didn't. She had spent her entire life believing consequences were temporary, fixable, optional. She figured it out 6 months later, when she realized the safety net she had always assumed would catch her had been cut in half. She called my parents, panicked, demanded they adjust the structure, increase her share, compensate for what had been taken. That was when it finally hit them. What they had agreed to, what I had done. They called me, both of them, within an hour. My mother was crying. My father sounded shaken. "You didn't tell us this would affect Vanessa like this," he said. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking out at a city that was no longer mine. "I did," I replied quietly. "You just didn't ask the right questions." "That's not fair," my mother said through tears. "She's your sister." I let that sit between us. Then I said the only thing that mattered. She stopped being my sister the moment she walked into my house and chose to destroy my family. Silence. Heavy. Final. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. Because I had already made my decision. Not in anger. In clarity. I moved 3 states away 2 months later. The hospital there had been recruiting me for over a year. I had said no before. Because my life was here. Because my family was here. Because my children had a home here. That home didn't exist anymore. The court approved the relocation. Daniel contested it. Weakly. He had no stability to offer. No argument strong enough to counter what had already been established. The drive took 11 hours. Nina sat in the back with her coloring books. Caleb slept most of the way. Around hour 7, Nina looked up and asked, "Mom, are we running away?" I met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "No," I said softly. "We're starting over." She thought about that, then asked, "Can Dad come too?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Dad has his own place," I said carefully. "You'll still see him." She nodded. "Okay," and went back to coloring. Just like that. "Okay." I pulled into a rest stop 10 minutes later and sat in the car with my sunglasses on so she wouldn't see my face. Because that's what this was now, holding it together in the front seat, while everything broke quietly in the back. By the time we reached the new city, my old life was already something I had to explain in past tense. But the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was understanding that everything I had lost wasn't just behind me. Some of it had come with me, and it was going to stay. People like to tell stories in clean lines. Before, after, break, rebuild. They like to believe there's a moment where everything shifts and the pain becomes something else, something softer, something manageable. That's not how it works. Not really. It's been 3 years. I'm still Dr. Evelyn Carter. Still 38 when this story began. 41 now. I live in a city that is clean and quiet and full of people who don't know my history. There's a park 5 minutes from our house. Nina rides her bike there on weekends. Caleb chases pigeons like they owe him something. The hospital is good, demanding, predictable in the way only controlled chaos can be. On paper, my life looks rebuilt. I have a partner now. His name is Michael Reed. He's a pediatric nurse. Steady in a way that doesn't demand attention. Kind in a way that doesn't feel performative. He showed up slowly, carefully, like someone who understood that walking into a life like mine meant stepping over fault lines he didn't create. He never tried to replace Daniel, never positioned himself as anything other than what he is. A man who cares, a man who stays. The kids, they took to him in their own ways. Caleb first. Of course. Children like Caleb trust easily. It's a kind of courage disguised as innocence. He started calling Michael Mike within a month. By the 3rd month, it had turned into Mikey. By the 6th, it was just normal. Nina was different. She watched, observed, measured, the way I do. She didn't resist Michael. She just didn't attach. Not at first. There was a distance in her, a quiet evaluation, like she was waiting to see if he would disappear too. That's the thing no one tells you about children after betrayal. They don't just grieve, they adapt. And sometimes that adaptation looks like strength. But it's not. It's protection. Daniel still calls. Every evening, 7:30, like clockwork. The court order ended a long time ago, but I never restricted him beyond what was required. Because whatever he did to me, he is still their father, and I refuse to become another fracture in their lives. The calls are shorter now. Nina answers with one-word responses. Fine. Good. Yeah. She used to tell him about her day. Now she doesn't. And I didn't teach her that. I didn't model it. That distance, she built it herself. Piece by piece, every missed moment, every broken promise, every inconsistency. Children don't need instructions to protect themselves. They learn. Caleb still talks, still laughs, still tells Daniel about school and games, and the way the dog down the street barked at him like it had a personal issue. But sometimes, late at night, I hear him, through the monitor, soft, half asleep. Mama! And it's not me he's reaching for. It's Lydia. That's when it hits me. Not sharply anymore. Not like it used to. But like something deep and permanent. A weight that doesn't move. Because no matter what I built afterward, there are things my children lost that I can never replace. Not stability. Not routine. Something more fundamental. The belief that the world they fall asleep in will still be there when they wake up. My parents tried to come back. About a year and a half after everything settled. My mother called first, crying. Saying the family was falling apart, saying she missed her grandchildren, saying she didn't understand how things had gotten this bad. I listened, quietly, the way I had learned to listen when there was nothing left to fix. When she finished, I said, "You chose your side. I accepted it. There's nothing left to discuss." She cried harder, but I didn't change my answer. My father tried next. Different tone, less emotion, more accusation. "You're tearing the family apart," he said. I almost smiled, because it was so familiar. So predictable. "No," I replied. "I'm living with the consequences of choices that weren't mine." He didn't have a response to that. There wasn't one. I haven't spoken to them since. Not out of anger. Out of finality. Vanessa, she moved. Of course she did. New city, new job, new relationship within 3 months. I saw it once. A mutual friend showed me her social media. Not maliciously, just carelessly. Vanessa smiling at brunch. Sunlight. Coffee. A man leaning into her like she hadn't detonated anything behind her. She looked the same, unchanged, untouched. And for a second, just a second, I felt something sharp. Not jealousy, not longing. Something closer to disbelief that someone could move through the world that lightly after causing that much damage. Yes. Then it passed. Because understanding something doesn't require accepting it. People tell me I won, that I came out ahead, that I handled everything perfectly. Custody. The house, the trust, the move. On paper, they're right. But paper doesn't capture the nights. The nights look like this. The house is quiet. The kids are asleep. Michael is beside me, breathing softly. And I'm awake, not thinking about Daniel. Not really. Not even about Vanessa. Just aware of something missing. It's hard to explain. It's not grief the way people imagine it. Not sharp, not overwhelming. It's absence. Like a room in your chest that used to hold something vital, and now it doesn't. And no matter how much you build around it, it stays empty. Sometimes I stand in the kitchen in the dark, the same way I did that night. Different house, different city, same stillness. And I think about the version of my life that ended on a Tuesday in October. The version where my children had 2 parents under one roof, where my sister was someone I could trust, where my parents were people I could call, where love didn't require calculation. That version is gone. And the woman who replaced her, she's stronger, more careful, more precise, but also colder, lonelier in ways that stability can't fix. Nina is 7 now. She watches the world like it might change on her without warning. I recognize that look, because it's mine. Caleb is 5. He laughs the way I used to. Open, unfiltered, unafraid. Every time I hear it, I feel 2 things at once. Gratitude and fear. Because I know how easily that kind of openness can be taken away. Michael asked me once, late at night, when the house was quiet, "Do you think you'll ever trust like that again?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth is complicated. "I think I'll love," I said eventually. He nodded. "And trust?" I looked at the ceiling, at the shadows, at the space between what was and what is. "I don't know if it will ever be the kind of trust that doesn't keep an exit open." He didn't push. That's one of the reasons he's still here. If you're listening to this, if you're standing at the beginning of something like what I went through, there's something I need you to understand. You will survive it, not because time heals. Time doesn't heal anything. Time just creates distance. And eventually, the ringing fades enough for you to hear your own life again. Protect your children. Protect what matters. Don't beg. Don't chase. Don't stand in the wreckage asking people why they broke something they were willing to lose. They already answered that. And if you're the one thinking about crossing that line, if you're telling yourself it's justified, that your partner is distant, busy, not enough, I want you to picture something. Your child asleep in the next room, trusting that the world they wake up to will still exist. Picture the moment they realize it won't. Not because someone told them, because they felt it. That quiet shift, that fracture, that loss of certainty. That's what you're risking. Not a marriage, not a house, not money. A child's ability to believe that love is safe. I rebuilt my life, but there are things in the wreckage that never come back. And some nights, when everything is still, I think about a kitchen counter, a wedding ring, and a door closing behind me. And I wonder if the woman who walked out that night was the last version of me, who knew how to love without keeping one hand on the exit. I hope not, but I don't know.